announced that the bill will no longer.
Dédicace de cette cathédrale.
Oh, hey, welcome to our program, The Point World Affairs. I'm your host, Daniel Che. On our show, we delve a little deeper into the stories making headlines around the world, and of course, the kind of stories that you would be interested in learning much more about. So, in a short while, join me in the studio to get straight to the point. I'll see you there.
Of the United States government.
تلاش کردن که 40 سال
Good of you to join us here in the studio. I am joined, as always, by Professor Song Se-ryun, Professor of Law from Kyung University, here with us to provide us with his insights and expertise. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Good to be here, Daniel.
Well, as we've seen from the clip, Professor, tension is rising in the Strait of Hormuz, considered one of the world's most important choke point for oil. And on June 13th, 2 oil tankers passing by the area have been attacked, and the crew had to evacuate the scene as well. There have been such attacks not too long ago, right?
Right. About a month ago, May 12th, to be exact, there were tankers attacked by probably a typical attack method by Iran, the limpet mines. They had their hulls punctured by explosions.
And just like last time, Washington did not hesitate to pin the blame on Tehran. Here's what U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had to say about the situation.
It's unmistakable what happened here. These were attacks by the Islamic Republic of Iran on commercial shipping on the freedom of navigation with a clear intent to deny transit through the strait. This was on the Gulf of Oman side of the Strait of Hormuz. There's no doubt the intelligence community has lots of data, lots of evidence. The world will come to see much of it.
And after that, Iran wasn't afraid to speak its mind, simply saying that America is framing Tehran. So the tension will continue to mount between the two sides, it seems. How do you perceive the situation developing from here on, Professor?
Well, despite their denial, the all indications are that Iran was doing it. They did threaten to close the Hormuz Strait after Donald Trump put the sanctions on Iran. So it's the continuation of escalations on both sides, and it adds the uncertainties in the region. I think that this is something that needs to be diplomatically solved, but Donald Trump is not known for diplomacy in this area. So despite his claim that he's seeking a better deal, any kind of deal is not in sight at this point.
Right. Well, Japan is another country that's tangled into the situation. One of the tankers is a vessel loaned by Tokyo, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe seemed to be denouncing the attacks regardless of who is responsible. So it seems like he wanted to avoid pointing fingers at any specific party.
Right. I guess that's partly because Iran has denied it. And more to the point is that he was in Tehran when that happened. So probably it is hard for a diplomatic standpoint of view to put a blame on somebody who he is visiting at the time. So it put the situation in a very precarious point to the Shinzo Abe because his ostensible purpose of the visit was to kind of secure a deal or some kind of diplomatic escape route between the United States and Iran, and also promote some peace in the region.
Right. We'll get back to you in a short while, Professor. But for now, we will connect live via Skype to talk about this issue with a local expert over in Japan. We're joined by Jonathan Miller, Senior Fellow at Japan Institute of International Affairs. Hello there.
Well, thanks very much for having me on.
So what has been Japan's response to the attack on one of its oil tankers near the Strait of Hormuz?
So the Japanese government is being a little bit cautious on this incident and has yet to make a determination on the cause of the attacks. Obviously, extremely inconvenient, and the coincidence of this happening at the same time of Prime Minister Abe's historic visit to Iran, being the first Japanese leader in over 40 years, and the first leader since the Islamic Republic was created in 1979 to visit Iran. This was not good timing for Abe's visit. But I think the Japanese are being careful not to rush to a conclusion on what was the cause. I think that they have a bit of a different tone than the U.S. in this regard. They've seen the footage that the U.S. has provided on the potential for mines being placed on the two vessels, but they haven't made a determination yet. So I think Japan's kind of in a cautious wait-and-see period. But it is important to note here that this is a critical issue for the Japanese. They rely, as do many other countries in the region, rely heavily on energy sources from the Gulf. Over 75% of their energy supply comes from the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz being one of those important choke points. So when the Japanese going forward, when they're thinking about maritime security, this is a key consideration. So I think the Japanese are going to look at this incident very closely and try to protect their vessels going forward.
According to reports, the fact that tanker attack happened while Shinzo Abe was in Tehran, this puts the Japanese leader on probably a difficult situation, diplomatic situation, because he was there to promote peace between the United States and Iran. What's your take on that?
So I think at least in the last days preceding Abe's visit to Iran, he very much domestically and through the foreign press tried to downplay those expectations that this visit was essentially on behalf of the Trump administration. And I think it's important to look at this also in the Japanese domestic political context and not only in the light of U.S.-Iran elections or U.S.-Iran relations. Japan has an upper house election coming up in July, and Abe, while he has a deft hand in foreign policy and he's had a lot of achievements in that field, he has been unable to secure a kind of a legacy moment, whether that be vis-a-vis Russia. He's been negotiating with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. They've had over 25 summits now on the disputed territories in the north. On the issue of North Korea, he has yet to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, even though this has been something that he's publicly stated that he wants to do. And obviously, the backdrop for that is not just the nuclear program, but the abductions issue, which is another important issue for Japan. So if you kind of compartmentalize or you bundle that all together, you see that Abe essentially needed a foreign policy win. He wanted something to show his credentials in a sense. So I think Iran kind of provided him that opportunity. But the risk is always there. And I think while maybe a negative appearing response from Tehran's leaders on the U.S.-Iran mediation was kind of not surprising. What I think was shocking to Abe and what he wasn't expecting, obviously, was this incident in the Strait of Hormuz, and that kind of overshadowed a lot of his trip, unfortunately.
All right, thank you for your time and expertise, Jonathan. We appreciate it. Coming back to you, Professor, it looks like with the military presence both sides have, there was an occasion in 2012 when an Iranian top military commander decided to block the path, and
right.
Also there's strong U.S. Navy presence in the area. Mm-hmm. What are the chances of this brewing into something bigger from here on?
Well, it's a little bit worrisome. I think the older generations will remember back in 1970s when Iran and Iraq were going for it. This kind of blowing up of the boats have been pretty commonplace at the time. That led to a pretty massive operation called the Operation Praying Mantis in 1987. This is not that situation. So we're not really foreseeing a big military operation coming in a short term. And also, the Donald Trump and the President Rouhani probably they both don't want the situation to escalate because Donald Trump's primary the purpose is to seek a better deal. However, what's surrounding them is that Donald Trump is surrounded by some hawkish faction in the Washington, especially Bolton, who wanted always the possible regime change in Iran. And also in the Iran side, President Rouhani is on the little bit of a moderate side, but the supreme leader, Khamenei, Ayatollah Khomeini, he's probably on the more belligerent side because of what's happening with the West. And also Revolutionary Guard is another factor where they want to take more actions with a little bit of a religious undertone. So I think the situation is pretty uncertain because even though those people who are directly involved in it may want the moderate actions, but the circumstances may quickly trigger into some military actions that could blow up the region. Because remember, the Saudi Arabia and even the UAE might be capable and willing to take some military actions against their enemies, which Iran is a prime suspect.
Let's hope both of them understand who they are dealing with, because either side, they're fully capable of conventional warfare and cyber warfare as well, very strong on both fronts. And also, if they do go to war, it will be not just one-on-one, but other countries having to get involved.
Right, it's going to be a big blow-up if that happens.
We'll keep our fingers crossed that Iran and the U.S. do not stumble into a war.
Right.
Well, South Korea would be adversely affected by the event as well. 73% of our oil import comes through the Hormuz Strait. Let's hear from an expert to what if and how the developments affect oil prices or supply domestically.
이란 입장에서도 지금 상황을 더 크게 끌고 갈 수가 없는 게요. 지금 이란의 가장 큰 석유 수입국은 중국이고, 중국도 이 라인을 통해서 석유를 수입받고 있기 때문에 이 문제를 갖고 오래 끌기에는 이란 입장도 타격이 크기 때문에 다 막힌다든지 호르무즈 해협이 다 막혀서 석유 물종 유동량이 크게 충격을 받는다든지 그런 일은 없을 거로 저는 예상하고 있습니다.
South Korea has been suspended from purchasing Iranian oil since May 2nd, with the U.S. lifting the sanctions waivers. That's an indication of a rise in oil prices. So now with the recent tanker attacks, we could face more challenges in importing oil. So how should Korea be prepared against these possible scenarios?
트럼프 행정부가 이란 핵 합의를 파기를 한 이후에 이미 벌써 우리나라가 그 컨덴스유나 이런 것들에 대해서 이란산 석유를 저희가 줄여오고 있었거든요. 근데 물론 저희가 중동에서 수입하는 석유가 70%, 80% 이렇게 많지만 지금 상황에서 석유 물종 양이 지금 멈춘 것이 아니거든요. 지금 오만 항이라든지 다른 쪽으로 이렇게 해서 빠질 수 있는 루트를 확보하고 있긴 하기 때문에 지금 상황에서는 크게 위협이 될 것 같지는 않습니다.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it. And now let us move on to the next issue.
Chinese President Xi Jinping made a two-day state visit to North Korea on June 20th. It's been 14 years since former Chinese President Hu Jintao met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-il in Pyongyang in October 2005. President Xi and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have participated in multiple events, including a banquet. Kim has reportedly offered Xi an invitation to North Korea during his visit to China in January. The meeting between President Xi and Kim Jong-un carried extra significance as it was held before the G20 summit. North Korea held summits with China whenever it was hit with roadblocks in talks for denuclearization, and the US stressed that China should not walk away from pressuring North Korea with sanctions. Experts say Xi's visit to North Korea was intended to show off China's presence on the Korean peninsula to the US, a nation it's currently entangled into a trade war with. The focus centers around how much impact the summit would have on the stalled North Korea-US talks and inter-Korean dialogue.
Chinese President Xi Jinping making history through a number of ways with this historic state visit to North Korea. What do you make of the timing of this visit?
Right. Probably what's on the Xi Jinping's mind, the first and foremost, is a trade dispute issue with the United States. But in doing so, in the negotiation, probably he wants to raise his kind of stash of chips by saying that if the United States, as they have in the past, want more role for China to play in this dispute, probably United States should go easy on China because China is pretty close with North Korea at this point and can influence more towards the more resolution of the nuclear situation.
So sending a message to U.S. without directly addressing them. What about President Donald Trump while he's watching at home? How is he perceiving this whole situation?
I think that he has the domestic issues in mind, but at the same time, his mind is probably towards what's going to happen next year, which is the election. At this point, he's facing some tough challenges in the domestic front, so a usual way of American president to solve or break through this issue, this situation, is to have some achievement of overseas in the diplomatic area. And the North Korea situation has been kind of a thorn in his side because that had a lot of expectations and the hopes, but it has been flat. So in terms of how to break through this situation, probably he wants to secure some assurance from China that they'll play a role. Probably South Korea is part of it, but probably the bigger influence at this point is China. So he has to kind of do a calculation as to what he can give and what he can receive in terms of trade issues and also North Korea.
How much of an input would this event have in speeding up inter-Korean summit as well?
I think that what develops would dictate whether North Korea sees South Korea's role either on the front of approaching the United States or on a lesser proportions reaching to China. I think that we always kind of envision some sort of a grand bargain between the North Korea and United States, which would involve the economic deals in terms of opportunities given to the North Korea, and that has to involve South Korea and also China as well. So in that sense, South Korea's role is certainly there, and probably have to work with China and the United States to put together a deal. But in order to get there, probably we have to go over the hurdles about what we mean by denuclearization and whether the United States would grant some sort of concessions as to lifting of sanctions that the North Korea desperately want at this point.
Right. I suppose the positive take we can have from the events so far is that we are still relevant in the global stage, and even the superpower like China and the United States will constantly be bringing up the topic of inter-Korean relations and peace on the peninsula.
Right.
A sign of a new trade war is imminent as India has taken retaliatory measures against the US by slapping higher tariffs on a raft of American goods. The Indian government announced its plans to raise customs duties of up to 70% on some 28 US products, including chickpeas, apples, and almonds. The move could be seen as a countermeasure to the United States' decision to withdraw duty-free benefits for Indian exports under its Generalized System of Preferences, also known as GSP. India was the main beneficiary of GSP as it sent $5.7 billion worth of its goods to the US in 2017. But it has been left out of the tax-free program by the US administration starting June 5th. The US has suspended GSP benefits on Turkish goods back in May and is waging a trade war with several countries, including China, whom the US imposed massive tariffs, urging to revise its unfair trade practices.
Trump again, picking a fight this time with India. But then it wasn't just Trump going at it alone. It was a matter of higher tariffs and tax exemptions ending. So it is a situation that boiled down to this, another confrontation, a trade matter between the United States and another global superpower.
Right. Another confrontation is exactly right. This measure happened in May 31st, but one day before that, there was an announcement of tariffs on Mexico, and the China dispute was ongoing, and there are other challenges in the multilateral systems abound. So you're right. President Trump is picking on a lot of fights. His motivation is to seek better deals, but even the deal has already secured with Mexico is not really a better deal in the eyes of a lot of experts. So at this point, there's not much achievement that he's making, but probably this is something that will probably linger on in a foreseeable future.
I mean, you need to start somewhere. You need to start with destruction to start some kind of construction, but it seems like we haven't seen much of the latter from the Trump administration. Breaking things up seems to be the forte. Looking at some of the items, American almonds, American apples, India is one of the biggest importers of these products, and India imposed higher tax on these two products as well as 26 other goods. And we know that when it comes to trade, such actions, it's like a very dangerous martial arts move where you could hurt your opponent, but then it reduces your lifespan as well.
Right. That was one of the popular misconceptions that Donald Trump has, that if he puts a tariff on some countries, then the tariff is paid by that country that he's targeting. But no, they are targeting the consumers and the companies that are importing from that country. However, his probably intention is to kind of strong arm the countries so that the country will come to the table and secure a better deal. But at this point, that is not forthcoming because of the situations that both countries have. India has always wanted the developmental country's status. That's why the GSP has been very important for them. So at this point, I don't know whether this would hurt the trade between the two, because the amount affected by the sanctions on both sides is not that large. But I think more worry is that India would be on not a favorable position or the stance towards the United States, which is another front that is wide open for Donald Trump.
Right. Make America #1 in the world doesn't mean make America the only one with no friends in the world. Let's hope the administration finds wise solutions to work and walk themselves out of this situation.
Exactly.
Well, Professor, looks like it's time for us to wrap things up. Professor Song Se-reon, we appreciate you coming in and making our program complete.
My pleasure.
Well, that's all the stories we have brought with us today. For more, do tune in again, same time next week for a brand new episode of The Point World Affairs. As always, thank you so much for watching. Hey, morning.
Dan, you just in.
What? Oh.
The U.S. was prepared to launch retaliatory strikes against Iran for shooting down one of its drones, but President Trump pulled them back at the 11th hour. This, according to a report from the New York Times, which adds that Trump canceled the strikes Thursday night after hours of heated discussions at the White House among top U.S. national security officials and Congress leaders. Citing unnamed officials, the Wall Street Journal also reported that details of the mission and the reason for its sudden cancellation were unknown, but a military response in the future has not been ruled out. Earlier in the day, President Trump said Iran probably made a mistake and that he finds it hard to believe the downing of the U.S. drone was intentional.
I think they made a mistake, and I'm not just talking the country made a mistake. I think that somebody under the command of that country made a big mistake.
You're talking to Iran.
Well, we had a lot of depressing stories this week, so wow, finally a couple of uplifting news to lighten things up. Here's wishing we'd have more such positive stories next week.